Yes,
evening, whatever it may be. Alistair, good to see you again. And we're back revisiting one of our previous conversations around music, the musical traditions in America, and how, whilst we're not going to claim that all the musical traditions in America are entirely shaped and brought to them by people from these shores, certainly there's a big part played anyway.
Well, I think you could say the bedrock of a lot of Americana, bluegrass, country music comes from the Scotch-Irish, from their songs and from their fiddle tunes. And the fiddle would have been the predominant early instrument that fed into the mix, if you like. And then you have other ethnic interests, other ethnic influences that we could talk about coming into that mix as society emerged and society interacted.
Yeah, so sort of, across the years there'd be elements where we look and we see, here's a musical tradition that has definitely been lifted from home, they've taken with them, this is where they've started off. But over the years, they start to listen to other people's music and as most musicians do, ultimately steal those sort of...
Steal, and it works both ways. They both jump the hedge. When I say both, we're looking largely at the Scotch-Irish tradition, the ballads and songs from the British Isles, and the African-American influence. So you have a mix of country, blues, jazz, gospel, and you have the American influence mixing all of that with the African music bringing syncopation and rhythmic drive to the whole thing.
Okay, so one of the things we're going to talk about today is we're doing this project in part because, and we're having this conversation in part because we looked at things. The last time we talked about Bristol Section 1927, considered to be the country music. We talked to our friends in Cuppa Joe, the sort of bluegrass band from County Armagh, and one of the things we said to them was, let's look at some of those old tunes and revisit them, and maybe you can do some versions, more modern versions of them. And part of the reason for this conversation is we've done that. They've recorded some tunes, and we're going to...
And they've done a great job.
Yeah, and we're going to intersperse them through here as we go along today. But I suppose even if we go sort of slightly earlier than 27 and the Bristol sessions, one of the tunes we talked about and we asked them to cover was Little Log Cabin in the Lane, fiddling John Carson. Sounds like he's a local.
Well, yes, I named John Carson right away. And of course the family did come from here. And in fact, we talked about people bringing their fiddles and things with them. The Carson family apparently brought a copy of a Stradivarius with them. And it was it that he recorded on initially. What's interesting about John William Carson too is that it wasn't just a rural tradition, a rural music with him. He, like a lot of families at that time, had gone to Atlanta, which was emerging as a very big industrial city, and got a job in the mill. And so he brought the mill tradition of work songs and of different ethnicity working in the mill. Also, he was technically very savvy when it came to recording, which was in its infancy. I mean, people were recording on wax donuts of things, if we look at them now. And so, if you listen to his original recording of Little Log Cabin in the Lane, you can hardly hear it for crackles. And no doubt a lot of work has been done to even get it as polished as that. But what you do pick up is the verve, the energy, and the real love for music and words that he brings in that, and his fiddle tunes. So Little Log Cabin in the Lane, and it's such a bucolic image, isn't it? It's just the image of people moving from, the whitewashed, thatched cottages of Ireland and of Ulster in particular, and having built a little log cabin with maybe the same floor shape inside, but of a different material, because that was the material that was available.
And that's sort of interesting. You're saying now that he's gone to Atlanta, he's working in the mills, he's bringing that, but yet one of the tunes he chooses to play and record is sort of almost providing this look back at
a hark back
rural.
To his own childhood. Well, you know, Wordsworth, the poet, talked about poetry being emotion recollected in tranquility. And you find that with a lot of compositions, that people think back to their own childhood and their early days and try to make sense out of those things when they're recording or when they're writing poetry or writing songs. So I would see it as that. He also injected into his act quite a bit of humour and did a double act with his daughter where she played someone who wasn't his daughter, and they fooled about, you know, on stage a bit and told jokes. So it was a broad, almost vaudeville approach to music. So Fiddlin' John Carson then was the name that he settled with. Okay. And there were a couple of other musicians early in the day too, but he's the one we're interested in here. But maybe we'll say a word about Ike Robertson and Henry Gilliland as well.
Okay, well, we'll take a quick hit now and skip over and show you, let everybody have a look at Cup of Joe's version of...
Who do this wonderfully. They do it like it's part of their DNA or something.
Yeah.
I mean, you really do get that sense of people enjoying the music and being comfortable with it.
Yeah, so Little Log Cabin on the Lane by Cup of Joe.
Chimneys falling down and the roof is all caved in, living in the sunshine and the rain. And the only friend I've got is this good old dog of mine, and this little old log cabin in the lane. All grown up that lead around the hill. The fences has all gone to decay, and the creeks have all dried up that used to go to mill. And the things have changed, they're still for another way. And the chimneys all fallen down, and the roof is all caved in, living in the sunshine and the rain. And the only friend I've got is this good old dog of mine, and this little old log cabin in the lane. Oh, I ain't got long to stay here with what little time I've got. I wanna rest content while I remain. Still, this shall call this dog with me to a better home, in this little old log cabin in the lane. Oh, the chimney's falling down and the roof is all caved in, living in the sunshine and the rain. And the only friend I've got is this good old dog of mine, and little old log cabin in the lane. Oh, the chimney's falling down and the roof is all caved in, living in the sunshine and the rain. And the only friend I've got is this good old dog of mine, in this little old log cabin in the lane.
That was Little Log Cabin on the Lane, Cup of Joe.
Early 1920s.
Early 1920s. And I touched very briefly at the start, Alistair, on the idea of one of the big sort of defining periods in country music, 1927 Bristol Sessions, taking place in Was it Bristol City or a city?
Bristol, Virginia.
Bristol, Virginia.
It's one of those cities in America where there's a line up the middle of Main Street. One side's Tennessee and one side's Virginia. So there's a Steve Earle song where he says, "I shot him in Virginia, he died in Tennessee." Somebody stumbled across the street as the image. But the link, I think, between those two events, we were talking about John Carson earlier, is that a man who took some charge of John Carson's career was a man called Ralph Peer, who in John Carson's time was working for OK Records, OKEH. By 1927, he was recording for RCA Victor and was looking for talent. There had been recordings before done by the Lomax, father and son, but they were for the museum. They were museum recording for archival purposes. What Peer was after was hit records, because radio was just on the teetering edge of becoming big. And so he set up in an old millinery shop, Main Street, Bristol, Virginia, draped old carpets and things around, and put an ad in the paper and said, "If you think you're any good, come to this musical event and we'll have a look at you, and you may be good enough to get a recording contract, who knows." So among those who came were a very significant family called the Carter family, who came from Mesa Spring in Virginia, which was a fairly poor mountain area. And they had quite an eventful journey to get there in August 1927, because they had 4 punctures on the way. It was scorching hot weather. And
I think one was pregnant too. So
lesser persons would have said, "Oh no, we can't do this," But no, they persevered. A.P. Carter, Alvin Pleasant Carter, and Maybell's cousin, Sarah Doherty Carter. And Sarah Doherty's ancestors came from County Tyrone. And A.P. was one of these guys who had collected a lot of existing songs, both like church music and ballad music that had come from the British Isles, and had tweaked it a bit. And copywriting was in its infancy, I think, at that time. And he copyrighted a lot of the music.
Right, okay.
Even though he's a shrewd so he's a shrewd guy that way. And they recorded a number of songs for Ralph Peer, which went on then to be, along with Jimmy Rogers. People say that's where country music was invented. Invented's a big word, but it certainly got a tremendous boost and a tremendous focus. And they recorded together, and they became very important in country music. Maybell's daughter June married Johnny Cash, and
country music royalty.
Although I don't know whether Johnny Cash always saw himself as royalty. I don't know.
Maybe in the Prince Harry mode.
I wouldn't drop that into the conversation. You offend somebody, but you need to edit that. But certainly, they became a very important family.
Yeah. The
marriage didn't last. They split up, but the music lived on. And Maybell's daughters all recorded, into the 40s and 50s. Yeah.
I think it's interesting in terms of one of the things that they talk about is, they're coming to Bristol, they're bringing with them a lot of tunes, listening to the Bristol sessions. You hear a lot of music that wouldn't have been out of place in a church.
Oh yeah.
But also then you find that tradition, the murder ballad tradition. So you hear recordings of which sound their modern era a bit sort of brutal, pretty like somebody being murdered.
But it's the same old story. Somebody falls for somebody else, and as a result, her lover takes her to a river or something and stabs her. I mean, it's one you've heard over and over again. The characters' names change, but that's pretty much it.
And that's a tradition, I think, that looking at it, you can see that tradition in England, you can see that tradition in Scotland, you see it in Ireland too, and then it just transplants itself across the big pond to America.
And I think, David, that's important because the Carters are bringing that largely without that, what I talked about there, rhythmic drive and syncopation. But if you're looking for that, Jimmy Rogers
Mm-hmm.
You know, the other side of the coin in 1927 there, the two big names that were discovered there in a way, brings that tradition. But the Carters very much bring the British Isles tradition of, you know, ballads, church music, shape music, all of that.
Okay, so one of the tracks they recorded on the day was Bury Me Beneath the Willow Tree, and we'll listen to Coppa Joe's version of that now.
My heart is sad and I am lonely for the only one I love. When shall I see her? Oh no, never, till we meet in heaven above. Oh, bury me beneath the willow, under the weeping willow tree, so she will know where I am sleeping, and perhaps she'll weep for me. She told me that she dearly loved me. How could I believe it untrue? Until the angels softly whispered, she will prove untrue to you. Oh, bury me beneath the willow, under the weeping willow tree, so she will know where I am sleeping, and perhaps she'll weep for me. Tomorrow is to be our wedding. God, oh God, where can she be? She's out according with another, and no longer cares for me. Oh, bury me beneath the willow, under the weeping willow tree, so she will know where I am sleeping, and perhaps she'll weep for me. So bury me beneath the willow, under the weeping willow tree, so she will know where I am sleeping, and perhaps she'll weep for me, and perhaps she'll weep for me.
So that was Bury Me Beneath the Willow, which was recorded as part of the Bristol sessions by the Carter family.
Yeah.
And you know, we're talking now about Maybelle Carter's one of the Carter family.
Yes.
Probably most famous as part of that journey to Bristol. You know, she took with her her auto harp, which she's got from
Absolutely.
the Sears Roebuck catalogue. You know,
She'd ordered it and invited it. And you get different instrumentation coming in just about this time. So you have the other harp, you have the mountain dulcimer coming in. And we come on to talk about Cajun music, and the mix with it. They play washboards and things. So you have different instruments coming in. The big one there, and Cup of Joe are very good on this instrument, is the banjo. Generally coming in about this time, which was an African instrument. I've heard people say, oh, the Scotch-Irish brought their banjos with them. The banjo is an African instrument. Let's nail that. And it would have been made, I suppose, originally out of gourds or out of cigar boxes on the plantation or something like that.
And it's really interesting too, because if you think about anybody now who thinks about sort of bluegrass music and country music, the banjo's all over it.
Well, I think a big influence there, of course, and he had Scotch-Irish antecedents, although his name doesn't suggest that, was Earl Scruggs, and the particular technique he had for playing, which influenced a lot of people in lots of different musical traditions. But I'm going on now to talk. I mean, Earl Scruggs was famously in Bill Monroe's band, so I'm jumping ahead a little bit. Bill Monroe and the Uncle Pen thing. This is a family story. Bill Monroe's often seen as the father of bluegrass music. And there's no doubt about it. Back in Jim Crow America, when it was difficult and dangerous, I would have said, Bill Monroe was friends with an old black guy called Arnold Schultz, who worked on their farm. He and his brother Charlie, and they recorded with him. They toured with him. They appeared on stage with him, and he influenced them a lot. He played fiddle and he played guitar, but he also, another part of the mix was Bill Monroe's uncle, Pendleton Van Diver. And Van Diver, of course, is a Dutch name, but his mother's name was Farris, and she had a wealth of Scotch-Irish songs and tunes that she brought. And Bill Monroe said, quotation, that his Uncle Pen had a marvellous Scotch-Irish collection. The Monroe name, the Monroes had gone directly from Scotland. But interestingly, the name Monroe, I think, means person who lives by the River Roe. So it also illustrates that crossover that was also going on from here to Scotland and back again. And we'll see that again in a moment. Bill Monroe, totally original, maybe a difficult musician to work with. People were in and out of his band, and that was a good thing. You have Lester Flatts and Earl Scruggs, part of the band. And in more recent times, the guy who's still with us, very much with us, and a great musician, Del McCoury, was latterly the singer with Bill Monroe. But Monroe influenced a lot of people, Ricky Skaggs, lots of people, and wrote some great songs. The Uncle Pen song itself is a great song because there's a narrative in it. It describes the music and how it affects the local community, and how it, every evening you could set your clock by it. It emanates down through the streets and you can hear it. People say, oh, that's Pendleton, that's Uncle Pen. He captures that, almost the music being poured into him by his Uncle Pen. And Penn having brought the influences from many of them, which were Scotch-Irish.
Okay, so we'll listen here to Cup of Joe's version of Uncle Pen.
Oh, the people would come from far away to dance all night to the break of day. The color would holler, do-she-do, then your Uncle Pen was ready to go. Late in the evening, about sundown, high on the hill and above the town. After the fiddle, Lord, how it rang, you could hear it talk, you could hear it sing. When he played the tune called Soldier's Joy, and then the one called the Boston Boy. The greatest of all was Jenny Lind. To me, that's where the film begins. Late in the evening, about sundown, high on the hill and above the town. Uncle Pen played the fiddle, Lord, how it rang. rain, you can hear it talk, you can hear it sing. I'll never forget that mournful day when Uncle Pen was called away. He hung up his fiddle, he hung up his bow, he knew it was time for him to go. Late in the evening, about sundown, high on the hill and above the town, Uncle Pen had the fiddle, Lord, how it rang. You could hear it talk, you could hear it sing. Late in the evening, about sundown, high on the hill and above the town, Uncle Pen had the fiddle, Lord, how it rang. You could hear it talk, you could hear it sing.
Of course, it would be remiss if we're talking about Bill Monroe not to talk about the big hit for him, which was Blue Moon of Kentucky, which was recorded by so many people. Patsy Cline, Elvis, on his first B-side, recorded a version of Blue Moon of Kentucky.
Was it any good?
It must have had something. It must have had something. And of course, coming from Kentucky, that's how Bluegrass got its name, because the Bluegrass of Kentucky. Monroe was such a big influence. Difficult person, I think, to work with, but in many ways a pioneer and an original voice. And again, with great energy and a lack of, he didn't let anything inhibit him. You know, the fact of working with African Americans and their music wouldn't have inhibited him in the slightest, you know.
Which would have been quite rare, or certainly would have made things difficult for somebody who was operating.
But Jimmy Rogers was like that too, if we go back a minute, because Jimmy Rogers actually at one time was singing in front of a band where Louis Armstrong, saxophone, was playing trumpet. So there was they were just interested in music, those guys. Yeah. They weren't interested in the labels that maybe we're, or the categories that we're interested in, and as a result, they borrowed from each other. I have an interesting quote about all of that from Dvorak. If you have a minute, I'll just read it to you because I want to get it right. And I'll say Dvorak, Anton Dvorak, the classical composer, no less, who spent time in America and wrote the New World Symphony and so on. But he observed, and I thought it was good, he said, the so-called African plantation melodies of the South, with their unusual and subtle harmonies, bore a striking resemblance to the indigenous music of Scotland and Ireland. Now that's coming from no less an authority than Dvorak. And certainly there was that fusion backwards and forwards where, you know, people say, oh, that's a good tune, and they just borrowed it, as you said earlier. Yeah.
And it's one of the sort of abiding things you find in the music is just how much borrowing goes on there. And how, you know, how the tunes are pulled in and people copy bits from this. And
well, I think it happened here too. That's a whole different story, that, you know, tunes that we would regard as belong to one community here or another actually jumped the hedge a bit too, you know.
You know, I remember a number of years ago being at an event in reconciliation event in Dublin Castle, and the band at the front of the room struck up a tune and played the tune, and I said, we're going to play a tune, it's called the Dublin Molio, and off they went. And the tune that they ended up playing, can't remember, it was the Green Grassy Slopes of the Boyne or the Sash, but you know, they were sort of laughing and saying about, you never thought you were coming to Dublin Castle.
I think a lot of that is, and I think that's a good way to look at all of this, and to look at cultural engagement and you know, what cultural endowment different peoples bring to a situation.
So one of the big tunes then we're talking about there, Blue Moon of Kentucky by Bill Monroe, and this is Cubba Joe's version of it.
Blue moon
we're talking, David, about the influences that different other ethnicities brought to the Scotch-Irish bedrock, if we call it that, I think a significant character in more recent times is Moon Mulligan. Moon's born in Corrigan on the Texas-Louisiana border, and his family have been in America since 1500s. They were really early compared. Most of the big drive was, the 1700s from here. They had been there really early. The name Mulligan, well, it's Milliken, and it derives originally in Donegal. And then, like I said something earlier, they went to Scotland. And all those names, Milligan, and then a group of them returned, settled in South Antrim, and they changed the name to Mulligan. So it's all the same name. Moon's family were extremely religious. He was brought up in a very strict religious household, and that in a way, in a funny kind of, obverse way, led to him creating the music, because his father, when Moon was about, he was Aubrey, by the way. Moon was a nickname that stuck. When he was about 12, his father bought an organ for the boy to play and to learn to play, so he could play in church. But Moon had other ideas. And by age 14, he was playing in honky tonks, taking $40 on an evening for tips, because he was that good. He played that honky tonk style of piano that actually influenced Jerry Lee Lewis, who came from the same area later on. And he said he didn't think he was playing the piano properly unless the beer bottles were dancing on the top of the piano. So it was a totally different style. Into which, in places that he was playing, the joints that he was playing in, you had people of all ethnicity. But a big group were, African Americans, and also the Cajun French tradition that came in there.
So what are we talking about here, Ulster? We're talking 50s?
Yeah, 50s. Well, I'll give you the date, in a way you can tablet by this. Moon actually wrote for Hank Williams. He wrote the big hit Jambalaya. He couldn't claim the authorship of it for some kind of contractual reasons to do with the record company. But he took 50% of the royalties all his life. And that was a big song. Totally sung in Cajun French by Hank. So you had that kind of influence coming in as well. And it moved the music slightly from, the fiddle and the guitar, even and the autoharp and all these things we've been talking about, to the piano. And to that, as I say, honky tonk style that Jerry Lee Lewis, actually, if you listen to him, is a better country singer, I think, than he is a rock and roll singer, although he's very good rock and roll singer. The thing about Jerry Lee Lewis is he brings an intonation that I think, Van Morrison, to some extent, has a similar kind of intonation in stretching syllables and songs. And the African Americans, who were musicians way back into the 1920s and 30s, they gained that, if you like, from these Scotch-Irish people coming in. And of course they gained the instruments that they brought with them, fiddle playing and that kind of thing. So it was something that both sides gained from. It wasn't something that was taken. It wasn't imperious in any way. It was a sharing, it was a genuine musical community sense that they brought to American music, and they created this new hybrid American music.
They're bringing tunes in and they're saying, what do you think of this? And somebody's saying, that's quite good, actually, we could use that.
That sounds a bit like Sicily. Yeah. The other thing about the song is, I'll sail my ship alone, although it's kind of a love song, because it begins about sweethearts and so on. To some extent, you could say that it typifies something of the Scotch-Irish spirit, that independence, that determination, that kind of streak. And I think Moon, to some extent, tunes in on that. Cup of Joe captured it perfectly. There's a jazzy feel to the singing, and they capture the kind of atmosphere that brings that fusion that I talked about, blues, jazz, gospel. It's all in there. in this particular song, in my opinion.
Yeah. So we have Moon Mulligan. We're talking here, you know, we're sort of doing that crossover almost. Is Moon Mulligan the crossing point between country music as we head more towards rock and roll? Is this his?
Yeah, there are a number of people, but yes, I mean, I just mentioned Jerry Lee Lewis doing both, and he did. But also Elvis, who was, you know, the hillbilly. What was he? Hillbilly Kit or the Hillbilly Cat, I think. Elvis, when he went to the Grand Ole Opry, they didn't like his style. Let's put it that way. It was a more conservative organisation those days.
Yeah.
But he made his entry into the musical sphere in the Louisiana Hayride, which was a big radio station, radio program on another station.
So
radio became important. That's definitely very true. You have this whole list of, you know, AM radio stations from the 1930s on in America. I mean, we were still talking about the wireless, and yet, you know, radio was moving ahead in all of this.
And radio probably plays a huge role in, you know, because if you think recording in the early days is dependent on having the equipment to play the record, even if you have it, getting hold of the record, and then you come out the other side, you know, and suddenly here you have the records are being produced, the music's out there, and it's going out through.
Getting your name out, you know. We talked there, I mean, the Georgia Wildcats with Gid Tanner, they recorded on like an in-house train tannoy radio system, you know, got their name out. But you had big radio stations like WFBC in Greenville, Mississippi, WSPA, Spartanburg, North Carolina, WPT in Charlotte, North Carolina, WBS in Atlanta, who played Fiddlin' John Carson, just to go round back to the beginning. And he first achieved his fame there, and it was the dominant station in North Georgia. And then, of course, you had WSM in Nashville, which became known worldwide for its program, the Grand Ole Opry. So
I think, you know, without claiming too much credit for all of this, I think it's fair to say that the Scots-Irish influence was very, very strong in terms of helping
I maybe stating it too strongly, David. I talk about the bedrock, that it was the bedrock, and all these other things built onto it to form a new edifice. You know, that's kind of how I see it. Okay. And it was a two-way process. It's important to stress that it wasn't, you know, we had the ballads, along came the African music, we put the two together like this, and we ended up with a new product. It was like that, the movement more.
It was much more of a melding rather than a sort of...
Yeah, and technology helped all of that. Yeah. And again, when people here got records from America initially, that had a big influence on indigenous music here. Yeah. And people like the Beatles, even when you think about it, you know, getting that music coming in through Liverpool, and then putting their own spin on it. Yeah. Okay,
so and we'll finish off with the last sort of tune now that we were talking about, Moon Mulligan, I Sail My Ship Alone. I think that's a fair way for us to sail off into the sunset.
I love that particular song, and the version they do is great.
Yeah, brilliant, and we'll listen to that now.
We've been sweethearts for so long, but now you say we're through. The love we shared is now a memory. I have built a ship of dreams and planned them all for you. But now I guess what is to be will be. I sail my ship alone with all the dreams I own, drifting out across the ocean blue. Yes, I sail my ship alone for all the sails you've torn. And when it starts to sink in, I'll blame you.
So that was Moon Mulligan, Cup of Joe's version of Moon Mulligan's I'll Sail My Ship Alone. And I think that's a fitting sort of point to bring our conversation to an end. Alistair, thanks very much for your time.
Thank you. It's
As
been a
always,
pleasure. It's been a pleasure.
As always, it's fascinating sort of talking to you about the subject and about how sort of people from here have had an influence. And we're here looking around as pictures of presidents and all the rest of it. And sometimes I think we talk too much about the presidents and maybe not enough about
the huge cultural contribution, which arguably overall has been more significant.
Yeah. So thanks very much, Alistair. Also thanks to Tabitha and the rest of Cup of Joe for all that they've done in terms of their versions of the tracks, which we're going to release, and hopefully you'll all think they're as good.
Well, they're a tremendous asset, aren't they?
Super. Thank you.